Of the numerous events that take place during the Day of Judgment, one of the hallmarks highlighted in the Quran is the confrontation between the two groups labeled by Allah as الَّذِينَ اسْتَكْبَرُوا and الضُّعَفَاء, the arrogant and the weak. In Surah Ibrahim we're told,
وَبَرَزُوا لِلَّهِ جَمِيعًا.
mankind will be brought before Allah to stand in judgment. The weak will then say to the arrogant,
وقال الضعفاء للذين استكبروا إنا كنا لكم تبعا فهل أنتم مغنون عنا من عذاب الله من شيء.
indeed, we used to follow you, so can you avail us against the punishments of Allah even a little? When you read these verses, it becomes clear why Allah labeled these two groups as such. In the dunya, the ones known as ad-du'afa were not weak in the sense of physical strength. Rather, they were weak because they failed to think for themselves, preferring to follow those who were in power. Instead of following the laws of Allah Azza wa Jal, they rendered themselves subservient to others for varying reasons, be it wealth, power, status, etc. These people never judged for themselves or used reason to make their own decision concerning what the prophets came with. They just followed whatever the trend was. On the other hand, the arrogant are the ones who were followed. Whether or not arrogance was an innate quality in them to begin with, they became labeled as such because when a prophet came to them, they would reject it without thinking. Throughout human history, the main group of people who have vehemently opposed the message of the prophets have been those identified in the Quran as al-Mala. The Mala are those in positions of power. These are the people who led their effort of resistance against the Anbiya. They would fight, discredit, slander, and even kill the prophets who were sent to their societies because 9 times out of 10, they benefited in some shape or form from the corruption that existed in society. The Meccans of pre-Islamic Arabia had institutionalized the practice of shirk and built a relatively sizable economic empire out of it. As such, when Rasulullah ﷺ came with the message of La ilaha illallah, their immediate rejection and opposition towards him was in defense of 2 things: their tradition and their wealth. Fir'aun convinced himself and those underneath him that he was a god on earth, so naturally the biggest threat to this psychological control was Prophet Musa alayhi, a messenger calling to the sovereignty of Allah Azza wa Jal. And this was pretty much how it went with the majority of messengers and prophets that were sent. As such, this group of people who opposed the call of the prophets were known collectively as the arrogant because when the truth was brought to them in this dunya, they refused to even attempt to view it from an objective lens or rationalize the concept of akhirah versus dunya. Rather, they were blinded by their status and wealth and chose the apparent worldly life over the everlasting hereafter. One of the important things to note here is the fact that despite this group of people being contrasted with those who are known as the weak, they are labeled as arrogant as opposed to strong or powerful. That is because on a macroscopic level, they have no real power. The so-called authority they deluded themselves and others into thinking they possess was merely due to their wealth or social status. And it was with this delusion that they rejected the truth. For example, Prophet Nuh's people mocked him and discredited his message on the grounds that
وما نراك اتبعك إلا الذين هم أراذلنا بادي الرأي وما نرى لكم علينا من فضل بل نظنكم كاذبين.
in the case of the people of Nuh alayhi salam, there was no attempt at rationale. They dismissed his message purely on the basis that his followers were not notable members of society. And what was this wealth which they leaned on so arrogantly? Maybe camels, sheep, goats, dates, some gold, etc. Things that were considered wealth at that time. And Nuh alayhi salam knew this, and so he gave them the glad tidings of beneficial rain, an increase in wealth, agriculture, and so on, if they believed. But not only did they refuse, each generation would teach the next not to listen to the call of Nuh alayhi salam. And so Kufr went from an individualistic ideology to a communal tradition, and Allah tells us what happened to them because of that. As for the weak, they were comfortable in their practices and traditions. And so when prophets came to them, they followed the lead of those who rejected because they preferred the comfortable familiarity of their idol worship and ignorance. On the Day of Judgment, they will seek help from the arrogant because on Yawm al-Qiyamah, everyone will seek help from those whom they believed in the dunya. Those who follow the prophets will be behind their respective prophets. Those who worshipped inanimate objects will attempt to seek help from them, and so on and so forth. The du'afa will beg the people they follow to save them from even a portion of Allah's punishment, but they will be told, Lo hadan Allahu lahadaynakum. If Allah had guided us, He would have guided you. Imagine the regret that these people will feel at that moment from the realization that if only they had thought for themselves and judged for themselves, rather than blindly following others, they might have saved themselves from the wrath of Allah. This point is summarized perfectly in Surah Al-Mulk when it details the regret of those thrown in Jahannam. The angels in charge of administering the punishment questions each group as they enter, asking them, Alam ya'tikum nadhir? Didn't a warner come to you? They will reply, Yes, a warner did come to us, but we denied and said, Allah has revealed nothing. You are extremely astray. And then they say, Lo kunna nasma'u aw na'qilu ma kunna fi ashabis sa'ir. If only we had listened and reasoned, we would not be among the residents of the blaze. This highlights for us the grave danger of following others without thinking for ourselves. If those whom you are following are themselves misguided, then you risk living and potentially dying upon that misguidance. And this is perhaps one of the most important lessons that we learn from the disputation between the two groups, that in this life and the next, true power is only with Allah Azza wa Jal.